My name's Tim. I'm with LiveRamp, who obviously we're a great partner of SMG's, and SMG is a great partner of us as well. So thank you so much for putting on a fabulous event today, guys. We're very much going to talk today about the M in retail media, the media side. Delighted to be joined by Alex, who himself is obviously a very well-known figure in the media industry, but you come from a storied brand as well, who I think everybody knows in Warner Brothers Digital. And per the intro, we're going to be talking a bit about that collision of CTV and retail media, because without some of these brilliant kind of off-site innovations and channels, there isn't a huge opportunity for the extension buys and all of the things you want to do around innovation with creative formats. That can be really tricky as a retailer just with your own inventory. A couple of the key themes we'll go through, I think, are going to be the tension perhaps that comes from a world that was dominated by brand when it was linear versus today's performance world. Some of the complexity I think we'll get into, because it's very multi-stakeholder as we think about brands and their agencies and data partners, but ultimately an opportunity. What's the opportunity here to make these things work, and how do we balance that versus the maturity of the ecosystem? So I'll shut up for a second, Alex, and maybe you can give us a little bit about your history. You were early in retail media, but you found yourself in CTV. How did you get there?
My sort of career, I started out at Sky, so I sort of started in that sort of linear sort of TV world. Moved to Triads, if those that, I've seen a couple of people that were at Triad in the room.
Mini clap there.
But I think at the time there, I don't think I quite appreciated how far ahead of the curve we maybe were at Triad around e-commerce. And I think as I started to work there and as I sort of moved along for my time there, I think I was always amazed at how you had this amazing opportunity in retail and sort of e-commerce completely disconnected from brand. Right? You had different industries, different activations. Quite often you would have a brand campaign that wasn't aligned with the retail campaign. You're looking for ROI and it's not aligned to the big messaging that's going out. And that always sort of blew my mind. Following from that, I moved to sort of more into the traditional media sense, and when I worked at a company which represented BBC Good Food, Radio Times, which then sort of made me realise about sort of audience and data and how do you look at kind of programmatic in a play there. Then had the privilege of moving over to Discovery at the time to launch the digital business there. Traditional broadcaster, you couldn't get more of one, right? And the brief was essentially we're a broadcaster, we want to be a bit more digital, help us build something. And what a whirlwind I've had since I've been there, right? We've bought Warner Media, so we're now Warner Brothers Discovery. We've done a joint venture with BT Sport to create TNT Sports. And so I've gone from essentially sort of that e-commerce world through to online media to now I play with assets such as Friends, Game of Thrones, Champions League, the Autumn Nations Rugby, Say Yes to the Dress, 90 Day Fiancé for any of those avid watchers here. I've launched 2 streaming services. I'm working on HBO Max UK, which will come next year, which will be the home of everything we own under the Warner umbrella. So it's been an incredible journey, and my role there, essentially, I get to play with all of my kind of experience. I kind of lead our digital business there, which touches every platform. So I'm kind of at the point from where do you take your content and then how do you monetize it in the digital space. So I look after our social business, our web business, our app business, and mainly the streaming I call rather CTV.
A lot of new words there. So, interestingly, so you've come from linear and you've moved into CTV. Obviously, most of the chatter and the excitement seems to be about piling into offsite, how we extend into CTV. But given you've had experience of both sides, linear versus today, are you seeing brands engage differently with the two? Obviously they do, but what are the things that you see as the kind of key differences between that linear world and today, especially as relates to retail media, right, in terms of how people think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of do typically look at it as there's a linear world and now there's a CTV world. Actually, the two are completely intertwined. If I talk about TNT Sports, right, it's on an app. You're streaming the Champions League final. Is that linear or is that CTV?
Or is it addressable? Is that the word
right?
you use?
So you kind of then start to weave in how is it different? You definitely see behavioural change. Linear has traditionally been quite hard to get into unless you have humongous budgets and you're assigned to one of the major agency groups, whereas streaming and CTV offers a much lower point of entry. It's an impression-based buy, and it allows you to do so much more. There's risk with that, and the risk is going down I can measure every single eyeball and I can target that very, very niche audience versus the broad reach, what linear traditionally does. And I think that's where we're seeing brands sort of play between. You still have the branding, you have the performance, you have new formats We can collapse ad breaks, for example, if someone sponsors some content. So actually there's a standout metric. You've got pause ads, right? We were talking about this previously, but you can pause content. It's actually one of the most bought formats that we have.
So you were saying you sell out on pause ads,
Sell out
right?
on pause, yeah. Because traditionally when someone leaves the room, if you're anything like me and my wife when we watch telly, the moment she speaks to me, I pause the telly, right? Because I'm watching and I can't answer her questions because I can't multitask so much. And then you have a message on screen and it offers an opportunity for a QR code or a brand message that otherwise you wouldn't have had. There's different inlays that you can place, different formats. But I'd say one of the biggest things, and I don't think it's necessarily unique to CTV, but it's accelerated with CTV, is I challenge anyone here to tell me that they don't multi-screen, right? If you're watching any content, 9 times out of 10, if I would almost argue 100 times out of 100, you have your phone in your hand. So therefore, it opens up so much more opportunity.
Yeah, totally. And I think that one of the things Alex and I were discussing backstage was that, it's interesting. A lot of the big inventory owners in the space, CTV space, they come from an era when brands didn't really ask any questions and agencies didn't really ask any questions about the value of branding and being in the home and top of funnel awareness and reach metrics. And you said it just a minute ago, you can measure everything. And I wonder, is there sometimes a little bit of almost tension in the fact that retail media purports that we should measure everything? That's a differentiator for this versus the fact that maybe it's okay to have a little bit of advertising serendipity like in the old days and presence in and around the home.
Yeah, and there's good to measure, right? I think one of the things that, again, the streaming space opens up is the different types of measurement. Traditionally, linear has been measured on that reach curve, whereas you can now measure on outcomes. You can measure in so many different ways. 2 brands might come to us and have completely 2 different ways of measuring. One might be purchase, one might be reach. You might have somebody that looks at store footfall, for example, right? It offers so many different ways you can measure because it's essentially addressable and it's digital, right? But yeah, constantly opens the challenge. And I'm a big advocate of the just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it's more about kind of stepping back and going, actually, who do you want to reach and what you're trying to achieve? And I think that's something we do quite well.
Totally. And I think, for retail media to really permeate and move across the entire funnel instead of being bucketed into specific parts. And, it's important that perhaps we do see an embrace of some of the typical branding and kind of more kind of endemic advertising measures that came before, because it allows for further breadth and a bit more kind of holistic planning and execution across that.
And I think as well, it's massively important to think down that track. And it goes back to my early comment about brand and like commerce essentially being disconnected, right? Like one of the most famous ads is the Cadbury's act, right? Massive branding campaign. Everyone knows it. It's iconic. Wasn't tied to ad spend, well, not that I know of, right? Whereas actually there'll be a shopper campaign that's alongside it, which is. So actually putting the 2 together and using the budget wisely and thinking about actually the full funnel piece of it makes you can think about things slightly differently rather than getting hung up on one metric.
So you mentioned a lot of different stakeholders there. It's a complicated world if we think about taking retail media and making it work in the TV world. We've got, in your old days, I'm sure you signed an IO with a brand or an agency pretty directly, you slung over the creative and we were done. But you mentioned measurement partners. We might even, CPGs don't even necessarily own any data, so we've got data partners already in there. So that must be challenging for you as an organization to deal with. I'm sure it's something that you're conquering, but how does that play out today in 2025 when you've got such a multi-stakeholder world?
There's multiple battles, right? There's internal battles. Being a big organization, the habit is we can build it, we'll do it ourselves. It's like, again, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And it's about partnering with the right partners. And I think our industry, collective advertising industry, moves at such pace. Actually, it's sometimes quite difficult to keep up, but I think that's also what makes my job quite interesting. Right? So I get to explore different things, I get to look at different ways.
I'd take your job in a heartbeat, absolutely.
Careful,
very interesting.
Careful, wish for. But it is challenging, right? And I think the biggest thing, and the reason I also love being in this industry, is the collaboration piece, right? Relationships are everything. And they're not necessarily a 1-on-1, it might be a 1-and-4, right? There might be 4 different stakeholders for 4 different businesses in the same conversation. And I think where we do see real success with the brands and the advertisers and the agencies that we work with is it is more of a collaborative effort to get something going, rather than thinking in isolation about what you want to achieve, and then doing it all, and then going, right, now we'll just buy that. And by the time we're at the other end, we're going, well, what are you trying to achieve, right? We might have actually found a different solution that might be
partnership,
easier.
right? You know,
partnership's everything.
We see this a lot at LiveRamp, where if somebody's thinking about the media partner as the bolt-on, and then we're going to add the inventory at the end, it doesn't work as well. You need to be in the conversation early, thinking about how you can structure these partnerships, because they're complicated.
Yeah.
And there's DPAs, and there's all kind of acronyms that we don't want to hear today, frankly.
And I definitely say as well, and true to us, I speak to someone in the business and find out we have something new every day, right? Like from an asset perspective and programming perspective. So if I'm keeping up with what we have and we own, I can't expect anyone else. And when I kind of say up front, right, with Discovery, with Warner Media, and we've got TNT, probably someone in the room didn't know that, right? Didn't know that we own everything from Barbie and DC Comics through to Game of Thrones and Friends and Big Bang Theory. The list goes on and on and on, right? So when you are thinking about... I
still never know which app to load if I want to watch the football. I don't know if anyone else has this. TNT versus Discovery, very confusing. Anyway, not your fault, I'm sure. A lot of the chat, it feels like, around the retail media and kind of offsite opportunity centers a lot on retail data, shopper data, which is great, obviously. But what about a broadcaster's data? Like, what about assets that you have? You know, how do they play a role in this, the 1P of a broadcaster?
Obviously, I'm biased, but I think the richness of it is incredible. We launched a product last year called WBD AIM, Warner Brothers Discovery AIM, which stands for Audience Insights and Measurement. And when I say about we have so many assets that even I struggle to keep up with, the whole tissue that we sort of planned the whole product around was, how do we utilize the entirety of our estate to make it a true opportunity for brands? And when you think about that, and you think about Harry Potter studio tours, right, the Hogwarts Legacy gaming business, our movies business, our rights business, streaming businesses, you might be on one of our recipe sites, you might be on TNT Sports website. In just terms of the data we have, we know what users are touching, we know what they watch, we know what their sports fan is, we know where they go visit. We have a massive, rich first-party data piece. And I think when you couple that with sort of grocer data or certain advertiser data, it becomes incredibly powerful. And I think the beauty of the product, as much as it has a targeting element to it, I would always say don't go too niche, right? We could go right down to the man with two left feet. But I think the opportunity in that is the insights piece, right? Knowing who the audience is, who you're engaging with and why, and running multiple campaigns with multiple different parameters and then seeing what engages with what. I think that is the real power of it. And that's where it goes back to that partnership piece, right? If brands don't know what we have, and we also don't know what activation they're trying to do, and also what data it is and where that data comes from, just because you've got data doesn't mean it's particularly rich, right? Let's hope it always is. But utilizing actual subscriber data that physically subscribe to our platform.
And household level data as well, right?
Yeah. Being able to pen its postcode, etc. It becomes really powerful.
An interesting point where some of the old tactics start to merge into the new world, I think, is around householding, you know, and the fact you've got such a deep relationship with the living room, with all of the different constituents there. So that's fascinating. This has been a really good, I think, flyover of some of the things that we're doing, some of the innovation. So thank you very much for joining me, Alex. Appreciate it. And any questions, come and find us after. We're more than happy to chat. Thank you.